My name's Glyn Pooley and I'd like to talk about art. This time my subject is
the Scottish Colourists. Yes, these group of painters, of which there mainly are four, and John Peploe being one of them. They were a group that were mainly working, this is quite early, this is their early style, around about 1900, but most of their work was done just before the First World War and then in the 1920s as well. Three of the artists only lived till their 50s, but J.D. Ferguson, he carried on into his 80s. So we see his work kind of take on another level, another style. So they were all had connections or lived for parts of their life in Edinburgh, and that reflects in a lot of their early work, images like this. The work that they started was of the kind of academic tradition, but even you can see it's got a freeness to it. But everything was kind of grey, black, or white, or brown. That was the Scottish academic tradition, but it did teach, a high level of draftsmanship and composition, which stood them all in good stead. But what made these artists different was their connections with Europe, particularly with France and particularly with Paris, and that essentially brightened them all up. The name Scottish Colourists wasn't really adopted till three of the four artists had died, not until 1948. Once they'd all seen their body of work together over a number of decades. But it wasn't. They only exhibited together three times in the 1920s. So that name kind of came after. But we'll see why they're called the colourists, of course, when we look at their work here. So even at this relatively early stage, they're striving out to, although it's greys and blacks, to add a bit of colour and freshness to their work. As I said, they'll be influenced by movements like the Fauvist movement, highly colourful and expressionistic, and certain other artists, Van Gogh, for example, post-impressionists and impressionists. But you can see with this style, the artist which I suppose is the biggest connection was Edvard Manet. Was a slight forerunner to impressionists, although worked at a similar kind of time, mainly 1860s, etc. But he had this free, loose handling of paint, and they chose a certain kind of subject, which was, there was overlaps in the subject matter. So I talked about this connection with France. J.D. Ferguson went over there in the 1890s, 1895, something like that. Peploe joined him a little bit later, 1907, and they had these painting trips together. And of course, the bright light of France and the intellectual life and the freedom of Paris, which they enjoyed as well, cafe culture and opportunities of expression, freedom, all started to come out in their work. When they go to France, we do see this kind of feeling of joy start to appear. I suppose it's that sun on their face, that that sun, that mythical thing that we experience so often in Wales. It just lifts their spirits and it lifts their colours, their palettes. They can paint out of doors on plein air much more easily, and so that comes through. It comes through in terms of the expression of their paint, but with the Scottish sensibility, that early reserve and academic structure. So you can see how almost in this picture, you can see the transition from the first picture I showed you, which was kind of greys with a hint of colour. And now we're moving through a transition where there's more colour coming in. There's more an emphasis of design, and there's also a reflection of light and light structure. Okay, so it's colour and light on a very structured composition. Particularly with Samuel Peploe, he spent a long time putting his compositions together, setting up still lives. Not dissimilar to someone like Paul Cézanne, the post-impressionist. You can see you've got this hard-edged quality to it, clearly seen, clearly structured, objects defined, but with an interest in not just how color works, but in what color does to a picture in terms of flattening perspective or moving the eye around to add a certain kind of vibrancy. This one, as I said, is a transition between something which is more subdued, like in the background, to something which is moving towards shining a light on a three-dimensional object. So it's not entirely flat. It's a sort of halfway house between three-dimensional representation, the illusion of, and two-dimensional flat design. The other influence, of course, was with the Glasgow boys, certain aspects of the Glasgow boys in terms of the handling of the paint. But like the post-impressionists, people like Van Gogh, etc., they were interested, and some of the Glasgow boys actually were interested in the art of Japan. That flattening of areas, that strong sense of design, that opportunity where you can kind of get to reflect on the movement around the surface, what creates movement, what creates a level of stillness. All those elements were influences on their work. And you see this from my Peplo, how all the design is there, strong design, but now there's a kind of heightened saturation in all the colors. So his influence is, by this time, of course, he's absorbed colors by people like Paul Gauguin, who looks like here. He's taken the Fauvists, like Henri Matisse, using very similar colors to Henri Matisse. These were artists that you would have seen in Paris. And, that opened this door, this window of joy in the use of colors, really. When you look at Van Gogh's pictures, particularly early ones, the design is not dissimilar to this, although they kind of often have like a black line around them. That was an early way that the post-impressionists painted. That was called Cloyonism, which just mainly meant just defining areas. So the idea of defining areas or design is important for this kind of work. So, if you've got your still life set up, you do your drawing, you make sure you've got a lovely design to it. So, we move in and out of different shapes and forms. We get a nice interest throughout the whole piece. And in this way of painting, the whole image is quite flattened. We've lost our three-dimensional kind of quality, and we substituted it for this joy in color. Okay? So, as I mentioned with Van Gogh using black to kind of stop the picture moving from one area to the other, the artist now is using this blue, which kind of gives us kind of space between areas. But it's a unifying blue. It runs right the way through the whole piece. So it's a way of bolting the picture together. And then he's experimenting with the visual impact of the certain vibrant colors. We know there's like a use of complementaries here. So there's the oranges, of course, which go with blues. Then there's the yellows, when they're complementaries moving towards the purples. And then you've got the reds, which of course their complementaries are green. So when you include all these different kind of vibrating complementaries in a picture, it will take off in terms of color. So that then it does need a strong composition to hold it together, or in this case, a strong design with an outline of space to kind of ground it, hold it, and give it kind of substance as well as it's making readable sense. Otherwise, it would just jump off the canvas. We're seeing the expressionist brush mark as well, but it's stylized. We're seeing directional brush marks, but they're not really loose. Okay? So those are the kind of characteristics for these kind of still lives. The subject matter was relatively conservative, hence these still lives, but it's a good motif. It's a good kind of model, if you like, to use to analyze color, structure, design. It's not like as if you've got to capture a moving figure in this case. you can kind of be quite considered in all aspects of your painting, quite considered in what you're trying to construct. What's great about looking at paintings like this is to realize that painting is a construction of color, it's a construction of shape, it's a construction of tone. When we're learning, and often in the class environment, at the beginning there's this kind of drive to want to make something look like what we perceive the eye sees, the photographic image, the hyper realistic image. You can see these painters are not doing that. They're doing something which can kind of stimulate the eye, stimulate the viewer, as well as read all the kind of different objects that we are seeing before us, but kind of have a quality which transcends the objects that are being portrayed. Color has that kind of quality when we get the tone of it right. So when we looked at this a couple of months ago, each color has its own tone. So you have to be mindful of what that tone is, whether how dark or light it is, because that will also indicate where it will settle on the picture plane. So for example, the obvious ones are blue, which are paler, will recede, and red will come towards us. But depending on the tone of the color, you can move it back or towards us to the front. So it's a way of just leading the viewer around the picture. So for example, if you made a picture like this, you created an outline, a black outline of a design, or in this case, like a blue outline. So you've marked out the shape of the flowers, marked out some nice shapes for the background, nice shapes for the jar, etc. So once you've got that outline, then you could start with one particular color, could be the blue. You could place that down in that area in a part of your picture, and then you can kind of use that as a key color to start adding other colors to it. So you could have your blue, then you could say, well, I want to get the exact opposite of that, which is the orange. So you could have the blue, then you could do the orange, and as we said before, then you could do the same with the blues. You could do the yellows, and then you could do the purples, just like in kind of opposites almost, until maybe you have all 6 of the complementary colors from the 3 primary colors there. That gives you this kind of great big color vibration. And the bit which adds the extra interest is the tonal relationships. So you've got to make sure you've got some dark, very dark in it, and then some light. Okay, that's the broad picture. But studying the pitch, studying the images, we'll see how that kind of pattern repeats itself. Okay, so these paintings were painted in Peplo's studio. They were compositions, maybe in Edinburgh. He had a couple of good studios in Edinburgh. And as a complement to that, to escape Edinburgh in the summer, he went out up to Iona. Now, a number of the artists painted up in Iona because of the light. But when he was painting outside in Iona, you can see he went back to the earthy colours, to nature's colours. So sometimes if you like to work in bright colours, imaginative colours, to ground yourself in nature can be really important and really helpful, because it kind of gives you some substance and it reflects you back to analysing tones. As I say, colour without an awareness of tonal relationships can get a little bit messy. So, practicing your relationship with neutrals and earth colors and blues in nature and their relative values will enable you to handle color a little bit more easily. Okay, so you see I'm jumping back and forth up to 1919 now. These artists also had to negotiate living through the First World War, which did have an impact on them, of course. It would on anyone. But Peplo served in the trenches. Although the artists were of middle class backgrounds, and they were upperly mobile. One trained as a doctor. Well, let's say he started off his training as a doctor. That was Ferguson. Although he wasn't a very good student, he just didn't like it. So obviously art was the way for him. And Peplo trained as a professional as well. Can't think of what profession it was. Oh, a lawyer, of course. So it's interesting because the way they are as professionals, in a way, the analytical construction side of it does kind of show out in their paintings. You see this in their different styles. So they just analyzed things. They kind of made sure things had that kind of thought about construction of substance. So here, by 1919, you can see, as well as all the design elements that we just talked about, with a bit of the semi-loose handling here, we've got almost symbolic use of colour now. The yellow and the orange in the background are used in a similar way that Gauguin used his use of colour. I know I referred to him a little bit earlier. So, colour operates like that. Colour can symbolize, for example, green can symbolize nature, but it can also symbolize the right kind of colour. Green can symbolize a certain kind of peace or tranquility. Same with yellow as well. They have an emotive force and they have a kind of spiritual force dimension as well, which the viewers kind of relate to, and that's why these pictures are so striking. There's again amazing color balances here. We're seeing this handwriting, aren't we, with certain oranges and certain blues, although they're quite kind of subdued. As he progresses, his colours almost go slightly acidic, like these greens here. It's kind of tangy. It's almost moving towards turquoise or a bit of viridian in it, and that's kind of singing out against the yellow, which is almost like an acidy yellow. Which, when you compare that to his landscapes he was making on Iona, as you said, which were earthy. These in a gallery, of course, would just shine out of the wall, off the wall. So they would attract, the buyers, because their art was kind of got a decorative quality as well. It had that kind of impact. It's interesting that they were taking on certain early 20th century avant-garde movements, referred to Fauvists. They were interested in the early work of people like Picasso, although they never went down the Cubist route, as you can see here, although there was certain flattening in it. But the Matisse route, which became more and more decorative and more abstract and towards colour, they were definitely following that path. And in a way, while they were selling their work in Paris, the audience was different to when they were trying to sell their works in Edinburgh, because they alternated between the two places. Not so much Ferguson, because Ferguson lived for 30 years in France consistently, but the other artists went back and forth. So they had a kind of consideration about how they could take their audience on with them as well. It's interesting that the Scottish audience, of course, would have been generally more conservative, but Edinburgh was a bit more cosmopolitan, of course. So this is 1919 now. They would have been aware of post-impressionism, and they would be aware of the Fauvist movement, the Matisse, etc. So they would have seen it as a kind of the kind of cutting edge aspect to reflect their art. The kind of artworks they wanted to buy. So, wow, colours and design are just, radiating off this picture, aren't they? With such strong colours and with such flattening of areas, with such an influence of the Japanese art, you can see this looks like a painting of a Japanese woodcut almost behind there. These motifs add a certain shallow depth to the painting. A little bit of molding, tonally light, mid, dark, but not extreme modeling, is there? It's not like really black tones in this. The colours are all around about the mid area of the colour spectrum, mid-tonal spectrum. But the impact of this salmon pink, which does jump kind of out towards it, because we know red has got that kind of quality, has to be very sensitively handled to stop it kind of moving, and dominating the whole picture. And one of the ways the artist has done that, of course, is by puncturing it with the red content in these tulips here, because that red, of course, jumps further forward than the salmon. It's got the salmon quality of it, but because it's coming forward, it's kind of just giving us respites in amongst those different areas. Very sophisticated composition. Imagine the artist putting this together, thinking about the main bold areas first, the strong, big, bold shapes, the rectangles, if you like, and then moving towards specifics after. I can't imagine the tulips growing in that kind of way and staying there. You know what tulips are like. They start in one place and they droop pretty quickly. So he's got the characteristics of it, of course, but that's the artistic license to offer you the design aspect of it. And we're seeing that these artists now are sort of early stages of linking with Art Deco, art decoration, of course, which was a movement that was all about design and composition. So notice the colours, similar colours again. Notice the complementaries, the use of the complementaries. Notice the tone of the colours that he's using, okay? And just think about that painting language, the fundamentals that will hold something like this together. And as I said, you can just hold on to your mind. The blue will recede generally, red will come towards us, but think about the exact opposites on the colour spectrum, if you can. That blue in the background there that he's got on, indicating that it's almost like a sort of sky blue, but it's kind of acidy as well, just lifts up the whole picture. And that's through experimentation, really, and placing one colour behind next to another colour. Remember, we looked at tonal charts, colour tonal charts, experimenting with that. So this is as I said, this is the acidy heightened end of the spectrum. I said acidy yellow, acidy greens, etc. It's on the other end of the spectrum to the earthy colours. Okay, even if you just think about the two ends of the spectrum there, it will kind of just sink in a little bit about the impact of these different types of kind of colours. There's always a construction. Okay, so here we go, still 1920s. We're seeing his artist's handwriting here. We're seeing the way he's painting the flat areas of the flowers, the handling of bold areas as well, bold shapes, the emphasis on the design, of course, the movement of the marks, the brush marks as well. If you want something to look vertical or diagonal to indicate what direction you'd like the viewer's eye to kind of move, and what plane you want to set it on as well. This influence, as you can see, it has got a little bit of a Cubist influence, actually. The early Cubism, in terms of the structure of the design, but he's not trying to portray the objects from many different viewpoints, as Picasso was. He's more interested in the decorative aspect and the color resonance aspect, and he's using design for that quality. Okay, so that was Samuel Pepperell. See, they overlapping each other, and then we've got J.D. Ferguson, 1874 to 61. There we go. He had he stretched quite a bit of artistry. Similar start again, the Scottish academic tradition, as I said, earthy colours, analysing good draftsmanship. Interested that they taught them the work of people like Frans Hals, like the Dutch school, and painters like Velasquez as well, in terms of the looseness of the handling. So they studied the old masters because it grounds you each time. If you get a chance with your own work to go and copy an old master, sometimes is not a bad thing. It will just teach you about light and shade and structure and all that kind of thing. And it's just good practice. So the more times you can do that, then you can be freer in your own work as well. It also teaches you about tonal relationship, moving from one tone to another in a kind of smooth way. As when we're learning, we get a bit clunky. You see that we move from one color to another, not being aware that sometimes we need a transition color between it, or we need to know what tone that color is in the transition. And by studying your masters like that, if we can do it in black and white or brown and white, as I said, it helps us when we start to handle color. Okay, so he's over in Paris, or going towards Paris, and being influenced by painting outdoors and being influenced by people like Whistler here now. Remember, we looked at Whistler's tonal pictures when we looked at tonalism in colour, his nocturnes and things like that. So we see where the influence is coming from. Ferguson is more interested in people than Peploe was, of course. And he makes a number of portraits, as you could see. But the expressive use of the painting language is here. The marks are, light and moving. But he's also trying to get atmospheres and moments that he's kind of experiencing when he's over in France, lit up really by the energies of the place. So yeah, firework display, fascinating, isn't it? How the light is often, we talk about this when we paint the sky outside. Look at the tone there. It's not really black, is it? It's a mid-tone for the night sky. And we can reference that by the relationship of the black of the figures. That's what creates the space of the night sky. You want to see the energy of the fireworks flying out. So that's all to do with the way the brush marks are put on. And it's, relatively quickly painted, but still taking the figures as fundamental shapes. And of course, when you're outside in the dark, you don't see all the bright colors or anything like that. They lose the color intensity. So we just get hints or suggestions of colors. So shape becomes more important. And then Ferguson, while he was over there in Paris, he was connected with the art world, the avant-garde art world, and all the intellectuals. He loved cafe culture. He particularly sort of connected with the Anglo-American group that were over there, of whom this lady is. She was an illustrator, and she makes a few portraits of her. I think almost like he lived the Viva Loca, really, did J.D. Ferguson, got to be said, up till the First World War, of course, which then put a little bit of a lid on it. But he had the time of his life. He absolutely loved it over there. Yeah, cafes, drinking, dancing, Diaghilev, all of it. He just had a great time, as did the whole of this kind of group. So not only did they paint each other, and not only did they study the movements that were going on at the moment, but all these things kind of coalesced. So this could almost be a Matisse picture, couldn't it? When you start to see elements of the defined line, the colours of these subdued kind of greens in the backgrounds, but with pinks, again complementaries, but subtle complementaries. But this time Ferguson's using still this very dark brush mark, which is design orientated and still bringing in from his early kind of training. So Ferguson also was particularly interested as he went on in the flow of the mark, the flow of the line. He was kind of trying to connect it to some kind of ancient Celtic past. So you've got Art Nouveau, of course, over in Paris around that time as well, with the sinuous lines of Munch, the Belgium artist, and Aubrey Beardsley and people like that. So he was kind of saying, well, this is my part of my Scottish roots, and he was trying to incorporate it into the gestural marks that he used to design his pictures. So you see this slightly rounded, flowing mark become a characteristic of his work. Yeah, they're fascinating. I just captivated by the suggestion of this lady's blue eyes. There's not much of it, but they're there and they're very piercing. But I suppose they kind of give the impression of that extra strength because they're supported by this almost blue halo around her. Although she's in the latest fashion with this black hat and a red kind of ribbon around it, the blue around it and that curve reinforces it, and that curve is echoed in the shape of her eyes. So when you have a repeated pattern like this, it just gives it extra force and extra rhythm and energy to it, which becomes another aspect of Ferguson's work. In this picture, you see it again, the flow, the movement of the marks, looseness of the handling. There's a kind of Japanese quality in the flattening of the print, the print quality. Beautiful colour for the blue. Le manteau chinois, that's the Chinese coat. So, Oriental influences as well. And that lovely kind of otherworldly quality to the model's face coming across to us. It's strong. It's not a character study in terms of the person's personality and all its subtlety, say, for example, like a Rembrandt would be, but there's a definite quality to it. Her face is kind of confronting us, it's challenging us, it's got a real strength to it, and almost kind of questioning. The decorative quality where he's used things like nature of the flowers and the design there in a loose way, but it's on the same picture plane as the decorations in her dress as well. So they kind of move seamlessly. So he's flattened the picture frame again, and he's managed to keep the picture together because those brush marks in the background are quite loose and free, and there's quite a lot of them. He's held the picture together with this circular, design. And I talk about having enough space in your picture. We've got these flat areas of blues and browny blacks, which enable us to rest in those areas. So it is a mixture again, isn't it? For you can have a busy area to have some still space and enough design flat areas in it to for us to kind of stay within the picture without either getting confused or losing interest. And here's another night study. Interested in the light, again, this special night light. It also gives an opportunity to take away the detail and to reflect on structure and design here. Interesting deep blue shadows for the light coming from the artificial light in the buildings. The blue just kind of creates space within the picture again. Nice use of green as well. That blue quality in it is quite subtle in this particular time, 1908. And that's what enables us to stay with the picture. I've also mentioned before, with these bit more sensitive use of colour, having some areas which have got neutrals or browns in or earths in it, hence the studies in Iona for Peploe, it just adds to a certain kind of colour harmony, which you can kind of really live with a little bit more over time, I suppose. So design structures, or again, all there. It's the balance between shapes and the rhythm of the different size of marks, and just adding a specific kind of strength of colour of that red and that green and the white on her hat, complementaries and light. It just gives us that extra focus. Interesting to see how the figures have just been broken down into these very loose brush marks, suggesting these kind of shapes. But they're also ending, particularly in the middle ground, with soft edges. So that suggests the movement and the activity in the scene. The trees, as well as their trunks, they're used as that design motif to flatten space, but also make it into a strong composition. Interesting to look at these pictures sometimes just in black and white, just to see that design quality of everything. And I've suggested this to some of you before as well, too. Do create your pictures in black and white if you get a chance. I've mentioned tonal sketches many times. It just grounds your picture. It gives it a certain kind of strength. Sometimes it's doing that for just a few minutes will just save you hours and hours of going over the same ground in your finished picture, or trying to get to a finished picture. So yeah, keep that tonal practice going. And here we are. We were talking about Ferguson with the rhythm of his marks here, hence the name rhythm of this artwork. The flow, we talked about the Celtic flow and Celtic movement around it. We talked about art nouveau, the decorative quality of this tree, sinuous tree, the Japanese quality, as I said, print quality, which are all there. And now we're moving towards and hinting at another movement which is coming online in Italy, which is the futurist movement as well, where they had these repeating lines and repeating patterns to, get the idea of energy into a piece. And energy and vitality was something which Ferguson was particularly interested in his art at this time. So there was this kind of movement in Europe leading up to the First World War. There was this kind of frenetic energy that was building that then, of course, exploded during the First World War. And it comes out in the paintings. So we got a rhythm, obviously, in this picture as well, when he's out in the kind of countryside. But this is more a Cézanne kind of structure. Interesting, isn't it? Both of the painters we've looked at, when they've gone out to nature at times, amongst nature, their colours have got more subdued and more earthy or more accurate towards what the landscape is giving them. And when they go back into their studio, make their constructs, whether it be the still life or whether it be the portraits, then they experiment with the heightened colours. Now, this picture's definitely got Cézanne-esque kind of analysis, the way he's making those marks for the greens in the background. He's looking at those areas and just seeing how the light is subtly changing and trying to grasp the nuances on the different aspects of the landscape that he's looking at as the time is passing. So particularly at those back areas there, that's right in line with Cézanne. The amount of influences and overlaps when they go to Paris is amazing. I'm thinking of construction, the construction of it, the use of light, artificial light, but still giving us kind of volume, but flattening of the picture plane. And we were talk about Ferguson with his energy and his flow and its dynamism towards futurism. And then you've got this picture, Les U. Well, that's an ambiguous name or word, really, but it kind of means sort of vitality, energy forces. He was particularly interested in physical energy. Him and his wife, who was a renowned dancer. She had a dance troupe in Paris. She came over from Britain, and they got together, married, and they worked together. And Ferguson was their artistic director for her shows throughout the years, following that a number of times. So physical energy and physical movement and dance structure was quite prominent. It's a feature and a kind of motif that a number of artists seem to use as well. Matisse was using the dance as a kind of model for, this kind of joie de vivre, as we could say. But there's that repeated form of the futurist mark, which can kind of just multiplies this energy force. These figures almost suggest as well, like that idea of being in the Garden of Eden or having just a right good party, but going round and round and round, kind of enjoying themselves, which I think was partly part of their theme as well. And then, of course, the war came. So these painters then had to leave Paris, leave France, go back to happy old Scotland or Britain. And it was quite tough then, of course. Couldn't sell their pictures, etc. and had to find slight other means to earn some work, get some money in. So Ferguson, they had quite a lot of connections, of course, as well. Worked for as a kind of war artist in a way, while documenting the war effort, shall we say. So here we got an image of a damaged destroyer, but in his inimitable style, color, structure, design, all kind of in evidence there. Kind of the hard edge flow, he's interested in curve, but hard edge flow was particularly pertinent for a destroyer or something which is so mechanical. And he painted a number of these images, and he went down to Portsmouth and painted the ships there and the harbours and the military hardware, and of course reflected it in this kind of way. Uh, it's still got a decorative quality to it, though. Although I don't know about you, I don't think it's as appealing, vibrant as some of those beautiful still lifes or even portrait pictures. But maybe that was part of his kind of objective with it. He was an artist, as I say, he spent 30 years in Paris and France, really embraced the life over there. And he was really strong advocate for the transition from the traditional, quite dark way of painting of the Scottish Academy to the light and the bright and the joyous aspect of the French art. He was the kind of promoter of that, and eventually, when he went back to Edinburgh later on in his life, he set, as I say, he was quite an intellectual as well. He set up these art clubs. He promoted the aspect of this opportunity for artists, if they get out of their environment, to think bright and think big. And that's always a great message. And it's because they loved what they did in this respect. And he loved it in those different kind of environments, so that the art looks the way it does, that everything is interconnected. So it is at Christmas in the south of France after the war, now taking on all the elements that we've talked about, but mainly, structured everything around the work of people like Cézanne, and moving towards Art Deco. Very flat surface now. Uh, yeah, strong design. Colours are more subdued. I suppose the impact of the war did that, of course, as well. It's bound to, isn't it? Have an effect on one's mind and sensibility. So it'll take a while to get back up to those heightened levels. Even in the way the tree's painted there, it's almost like, imagine that poor old tree's gone through the war. It looks a bit battered and twisted, a little bit gnarled, as do the buildings. They almost look as if they could be crumbling, or they're all on top of each other. So it just affects the artist's perception of mind there. So he's got to rebuild, is basically what happens. And he does. He rebuilds his mind in that way. This is a later one now, 1937. And we mentioned the monumental pictures of people like Cézanne, and Ferguson's interest in the body beautiful. There was a kind of movement that went on to enhance the physical body, which was then going to have an impact on the mental body, mental mind, strength. And that was a system called eurythmics, whereby, exercise made such a difference to everything. And I suppose because his wife was a dancer, and the physicality of all that, they kind of played out. So he creates these kind of iconic, kind of monumental, supreme figures, which are very clearly Art Deco, Tamara de Lempupnik kind of face going on there, where he gets the opportunity to explore his Cézannesque quality, the kind of repeating patterns of futurism, the flattening of space, all those kinds of things, the way he's using tone and marks, the design aspect as well, all kind of overlap in these bigger paintings. And they become almost like big decorative murals, but they're iconic kind of pictures. You know? This figure almost looks like could be the Oscar-winning object they give people, isn't it? You know, um, the supreme example of what physical health is supposed to look like. Though I don't think many of us quite look like that. But there we go. Pass on that swiftly. Let's have another cake and a piece of tea. Anyway, it's later on, and all these influences have accumulated now in his work. Now, this is another example of it. 1958 now. It is quite late. They're beautiful, you know, and as you said, Art Deco and art design is all there. There's even kind of bits of overlaps in this with certain aspects of the Bloomsbury group in terms of their design, although everything is flattened and put into flat kind of colours. So even when he's gone back to Scotland now, as he was here, he's taken the south of France with him. He's also taken the glamorous world of show business with him there. And yeah, it was interesting how the old academic Scottish Academy would have related to this. He didn't really connect or show. Although they honoured him, you know, they didn't really be part of that scene. So he kind of followed his own path in this way. But we just connect with the joy and the exuberance, I suppose, and the glamour aspect as well. When you think of, particularly in Britain, I suppose by then it was pretty dark in the 1950s in Britain, wasn't it? And there was a kind of look almost to the film stars. So he's kind of capturing that Hollywood kind of glamour quality in these pictures now. Oh, and then we got a time. Sorry, it's going on quick. I'll have to move quick. Hunter. So this is another one of the four. He was more interested. He spent more time looking at watercolor as well, as you can see. So the ink and the watercolor kind of quality and the drawing. Until I was born in Edinburgh, I was born in Scotland, Leith, I think it was, or just outside Edinburgh. And then his dad took the family to America, and he was there and in the 1910s, and I think he left. No, he left around about 1906 because I know a lot of his work was lost in the earthquake in San Francisco. So he then left America and went to Paris. Of course, you know, Paris, met some of the other arts we've been talking about, and they all had their Scottish heritage connection as well, so they could kind of share all these little threads that we've been discussing today. But Hunter is a different kind of mark maker. The line, the drawing is more evident. He's more fragile or delicate, I think is the way. He's not so strong design orientated. You'll see that the edges are a little bit more wavy. So you see in this one, there's sort of, you can see the marks and the way they've been laid down, but the color definition isn't as strong. He's more interested in light effects on color. So whether you shine a bright light on an object, what kind of color that gives, to whether you put a soft light on it, and how you can somehow just get the appropriate color for the sensor light as well. It's kind of subtle, but it kind of can read as not as strong in reproduction as maybe the Ferguson's work does. But still life was a part of the genre again to study these kinds of aspects. The mark making is similar, as you can see, it's expressionistic. Hunter is more expressionistic with his line, and the paint it's almost more tentative in a way. So you see it is leaving parts, almost like parts of the canvas showing. The paint has got kind of qualities which blend into each other and almost create a kind of soft cloudy effect in parts in the transitions. Particularly you see that in the background there. So one thing can read as two things simultaneously. There's a blending. Hunter's work is, it's not quite as strong as the others, really, from a painterly point of view. It's of the same genre, same kind of, in the same area, and he was interested in, of course, in similar kind of things. That's why he's kind of been put together. But it's almost as if the design, the intellect isn't quite as strong. Anyway, that's just an opinion. I'm sure there's lots of people who disagree with that. But we can see the same similarities, the structure. We see the emphasis on color, shape, tone, etc. And here's one of his provincial landscapes, where all the marks are evident. We can see the linear quality is evident. Black lines, okay, defining things. There's a movement to it. He's obviously capturing an amazing light. Complementaries are being used again, oranges and blues, things like that. Reds and greens, more earthy. Maybe the tentative mark is just a characteristic that appeals to some people more than others, I suppose. But for me, sometimes looking at like areas of that mountain, it just looks a little bit confused, and parts of this at the background there. He's trying to work out where to put the mark rather than I've worked it out and there it goes and it's in the most appropriate place. But that's painting for you, isn't it? Some people will love that investigative kind of quality in a painting, and that's what makes art so fascinating. But he's captured a lovely light, and the colours are beautiful again. So we can take all that from it. And later picture here now, and just before he passed, really, he's up in Scotland in the houseboats. He did like reflections. He did paint lots of this reflective quality. So you can analyze his reflections and the kind of marks he's used to achieve them. And his handwriting is all over the picture again, isn't it? The tentative handwriting. As a person, he's the one who suffered the most in his life as well. He had all kinds of struggles happen to him. So I think that just almost frailty at times kind of comes out in his brush marks, which can be a really nice sensitive quality as well. It's how you interpret it. But he's got the feeling and the atmosphere. I imagine in Scotland that it's like an overcast day here in this later picture. But a nice harmony on the boat with that soft muted yellow and subtle kind of greens. And then one of the last artists is Francis Cadell, who, kind of monumental painter in the way he handles paint with such a confidence. Although he travelled to France, as you can see here, he had a big established studio in Edinburgh, and he did a number of these outdoor landscapes, landscapes, taking on this beautiful light and balancing them up with these wonderful colours. But he also made these beautiful still lifes and interiors, which we'll have a look at. This is a slightly earlier, for him, slightly earlier style. He's got that black and the greys in there, but there's a slight looseness of handling. Even before this, his handling was even looser. But again, real good, strong analysis of shape, form, tone, colour. But he's interested in figures as a motif in interiors as well. That's what kind of defines his oeuvre. And the way he constructs a picture and creates space with colour relationships. And this is a fantastic example of a constructed picture that kind of knows how to use kind of colour. This is an example of what his studio was like as well. Pretty grand. I think he'd done quite well by 1927. I think he had financial backing early on, but he did sell a lot of work. And all the influences that we've been talking about kind of coming out in this. The Japanese quality you can see in those kind of screens. He's taking the old academic tradition of the Scottish art, of being aware of tonal relationships of darks and lights. He's putting together amazingly strong designs. Okay, so the whole picture holds together very strongly. He's using complementaries as well in a very subdued and subtle ways. The balances of certain oranges with certain blues. Lovely treatment of still lives. So there's a kind of looseness of handling as you move towards the front here. The figures are used as kind of, as in they're not personality studies. They're used as motifs or structural motifs to add interest and balance to the scene, as well as suggesting a physical presence. Though I suppose the figure at the back at the piano looks maybe a little bit stiff, but that's to do with the kind of overall look of the picture. He wants this kind of stability in it. So he's taken these elements and he's put them all together. Can imagine a door in reality as you look at it, would be quite that tall. That's one tall door, isn't it? So this use a motif. He's taken its essence and he's just extended it up because that's for design quality purposes. Same with a chandelier. He's just put that in the place that he needed it to be. Behind the door, it wouldn't stand up if we were in that room, but it kind of holds the picture together. It's got a lovely bit of strip of blue lighting on that door as well, again, which is a complementary of the orange. So it just kind of lifts up the whole picture. So real awareness of how color works. He painted a whole series of these kind of works that were amazing constructs and got wonderful design and color harmonies, subtle balances between greens and reds and purples and pinks, complementaries again, but with a full range of colors, strong tones, so full tonal range, between the darks and the lights. Look at that dark tie on that white of the tablecloth. Just adds so much sense of depth in the picture. But then the tone of the red kind of enables that to kind of come in front of us. Very sophisticated color and tone balancing. He also creates the idea of a space by using these mirrors and frames within frames, pictures within pictures. You see lots of that references of pictures within pictures. I'm sure he had them hanging around in his studio, but he uses it as a motif to give more information. So he might have in one picture in the background, it might be a Japanese print, and he'd have a mirror showing a different part of the room as well. So it all suggests this extra space, even though everything is really quite flat. The tonally, everything's flat. It's not modeling, it's not three-dimensional modeling on it as it would have been in, Renaissance picture, for example. Just with careful blending from dark to light. He's just letting shape and the drawing create the sense of space and perspective in the piece. Very, lovely design structure. The blue fan, you see, just lovely colour blue as well. Lovely colour blue with that lovely green in the background. Just very, very nice. The way that white vase as well sits on this black support of this table, which we can hardly read it as a table, it almost just looks like a dark shape. This dark black and his design was his interest in the Japanese screens and the Japanese art quality again, but it just kind of is so strong. It's just a lovely way he's kind of constructed it. So you move around from one aspect of the picture to the other, exploring these different kind of color forms. Takes a lot of kind of experimentation to get those colors just right. Linking it up with like that subtle lilac on the left hand side and then on the right hand side. That goes lilac to the pale yellow on the left. On the right was yellow to pale lilac. So it's reversed the same colours across the picture plane. So it's on the right, it's in the centre, and it's on the left. And that's binding the whole picture together. When you've got a complicated scene like this, that really helps. That black even has got a lot of blue content in it. You see it just picking up in the centre there. So the sun's coming through in the pot and it's coming through in the part of the fan. And then the white is offering that really strong contrast to add that extra depth. So these are all the kind of nuts and bolts of the art, what the art is using. And we can, and in the same kind of colours that he's using in in these pictures to create his kind of language. And if we can just kind of absorb some of them, we can see how we get this really strong and beautiful harmony in the picture.
If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe and click the bell notification.